evening. Welcome this evening to our FST event. Order. That's what we used to Feryal. Good, thank you very much. Well, welcome to this event. We try at the Foundation for Science and Technology to debate the hot topics at the right moment, and I think we've certainly managed to do that with our AI event this evening, Governing AI for Humanity, What's Needed Globally in the UK. And our three presentations will all be from people directly and closely involved in this. We'll begin with Dame Wendy Hall, who, of course, has been closely involved in, amongst other things, advising the UN on their global approach. And I'm delighted that we're also joined by the Minister. Thank you so much. And the Minister, Feryal, has kindly agreed after the three presentations. We'll then come to you for your immediate observations. And of course, you've got 150 smart scientists who'll be analysing every facial expression as the presentations go through. But Wendy, it is fantastic you spared the time. Over to you for the first presentation.
Okay, right. What do you mean spared the time? I wanted to do
You're a very busy person.
Hello everybody. Oh, that's me. I must be ready then. Oh, good, yes. So, I'm a Mac user. I'm a professor of computer science, but I can't use the technology. So that's... we launched the UN report in September. I'm going to mention it. And at that point, I started talking to people both in the Office for AI, the Institute, Safety Institute, and Gavin, about having an event at the Royal Society. This is the event we've organised. And it couldn't have been more timely if we had, planned all the events that have been going on. Now, what I'm going to do in 10 minutes is tell you the story of AI until today. And then my colleagues will give their opinions, and I will give opinions later. I haven't got time in this to actually tell you what I think we should be doing. So let's hit the ground running. So that was the name of the UN report, by the way, Governing AI for Humanity. Now, I'm not going to go through the history of AI. We like to think it started in the UK with Alan Turing. We've gone through several revolutions. This is just to make the point. This is not new stuff. But what's happened has been a profound change in the way in which AI is evolving. When I do a longer talk, I include the AI winters in this presentation. And I think we're in an AI blazing summer at the moment, but who knows how it's going to turn out. I got first involved. I thought I was going to stay a web science professor for the rest of my career, but I got asked to do the UK review of AI by Theresa May and her government in 2017. It was about economic growth and job creation, words we hear a lot of today. I did keep telling this government to read this report, and I think they did. But anyway, I've talked to Feryal. We've had a chat about all this. And then it went into Greg Clark's industrial strategy, and there was a $1 billion deal set up to put, and that was the beginning. From that came the Office for AI, the AI Council, and all the investment in AI that came through a series of conservative governments through to, of course, when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister, as Chancellor, he did a lot of the giving of the money for this fund. And it was proceeding, and we were really on the front foot. AI regulations started to come into national strategies at this point, so this is 2021 we're up to now. Our review was in 2017. And this is when the EU started laying the groundwork for their AI Act. China was already, I'm going to make the point throughout this, that China's always been in this game. They're not just playing catch-up. And they've passed a lot of interesting laws as well. But of course, they have a very different way of dealing with content. And so they were, this is 2022, our national strategy that came from out of the Office for AI, from the review that Jerome and I wrote, was published this is September 21, in the COVID years. I remember doing all the phone calls about it. So I think we were the first country to have an actual national strategy. And then the EU started to talk to the US about trying to persuade them to adopt the EU AI Act, and that's now, that discussion is history. And then we jumped to 2023. This was the big game changer. We had seen generative AI coming. It wasn't that we were blind to it, but what Sam Altman did, and I don't know if he's going to go down in history as a good guy or a bad guy, but what Sam Altman did was the very clever ChatGPT interface so that anybody could interact with an AI. And all of a sudden, over that Christmas 2022, everybody from government ministers through to the media, the general public, everybody was playing with ChatGPT without really, a lot of people not understanding what they're doing, they're just having fun with it. But I'll just make the point here that China was already up with that technology at that time. They didn't have an interactive version, but they had their Wu Dao. And I know the people who developed that, and it was a very powerful, it is still technology they use. Then the UK published its pro-innovation approach to AI regulation, which was actually a very good paper, but it went down like a lead balloon because it was like, nothing against the people who wrote it. It was just like not the time to produce something that had to be quite considered whilst the ChatGPT debate was going on. And then we went into the era of the existential threat, which was always rubbish. I'm sorry, but scientifically, generative AI is never going to be an existential threat in terms of going rogue. It could do, in the future, we may well be facing this. And I applaud the work of the Safety Institute. I want it to be broader rather than just narrowly looking at American generative AI models. And I assume, I haven't talked to anyone today from there, but I assume they're busily looking at Chinese models now. I don't know exactly, but the meme that came out about, you know, we're all going to be dead by 2025 or 26 or something was very scary for people. And actually way away from the truth of where the technology, the science actually was. It was a lot of, a considerable amount of hype driven from Silicon Valley. And even like when so this is all 2023, when Geoffrey Hinton, who's got the Nobel Prize, of course, well deserved, an ex-Brit, said, I'm leaving Google because it's all too dangerous. This is the guy who invented it all. And I thought, you really shouldn't be standing up and saying, this is it's too dangerous, I'm going to walk away from it. I think what he actually was doing was saying, I want to be free to say what I want to be, you know, I don't want to be working for one of the big companies. And he has tempered his remarks since then and has been very wise about things. But it was a meme the media picked up that this stuff is very, very dangerous now. And we should all be, you know, we should have sleepless nights about it. And that was way too over the top, way too extreme. Well, I don't know why that thing's come through there, but anyway, on the left there, I don't know. But then we went through, that was picked up by the last government and to seize the high ground, and I think it was very good for the UK that they did this. Rishi Sunak, talking to Biden there, can you see the pictures? Yeah. You'll note the diversity in the pictures, by the way. He goes to Biden to say, I'm going to run a summit, will you come? It's going to be a safety summit, and fine, yeah, okay, these things we need to do this stuff. But we're still in the, Matt Clifford was saying, you know, AI could kill many humans within 2 years. Well, he said that last year, so, you know, what was it, 20, I can't remember now, 23? Yes, 23, so we're going to be dead this year from it. This was all, but anyway. And then you can see the tech bro dominance, okay? That's the meeting Rishi had with the tech bros and the meeting Biden had with the tech bros, just making a point there. Meanwhile, China, in its way, was launching its AI framework through its Belt and Road Forum. China influences a huge part of the world. Read my book, Four Internets. In technology and the internet and now AI, China is influencing a large part of the world in terms of what it's doing in this area and giving them the money to do things that we aren't doing. I mean, in terms of helping them develop AI, helping them use AI. Then we get, how am I doing on time, Gavin? Then we get the UN saying, we're going to try and do something about this because we need some global governance. You don't know, do you? How long have I got? Oh, fine, good. So, oh God, I forget this now. This is October 23. The UN AI advisory body was set up. We had less than a year to produce a report about how the world should be can set up some form of global governance of AI. I could talk to you loads about that, but I don't have the time. That we were set up in October 23. It was all happening very fast then. The Prime Minister announced the UK AI Safety Institute, made the announcement. That was in October 23. We had hardly any notice of, and there weren't that many people invited, actually. I was one of the lucky, there were very few academics, professors, scientists invited to the first summit. I was one of the lucky few. Then they announced it and announced the AI Safety Institute is the key thing here on the 26th of October. And Biden announces his executive order 5 days later saying, I want you to I want to give the companies, ask the companies to self-regulate. So you're beginning to see the tensions. Although we're working together, they're going to have a summit that every Americans were coming for. There was already the tension there about how this should be managed. The Americans, of course, announced a safety institute, but I think that's probably off the table now. I don't know for sure, but I imagine it is, with the Trump executive orders throwing everything out of the window. Jump to September 24, when we in the EU, that was all in October. I might get my dates right. This is September last year. So the safety summit was October 23. It was, wasn't it? Yeah, so, yeah, I'm confused because it wasn't one a year. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this was the report we wrote. After a year, it went through into the General Assembly, took a vote, and the recommendations were accepted through a rather convoluted route, but they were. And they were effectively to set up an international scientific panel, hopefully building on what the work the UK has already done, a global policy dialogue on AI governance, think nuclear treaties here, AI standards exchange, and work for the globe for the playing field to be equal, the global south, so creation of a global AI capacity development network, and the establishment of a global AI fund to support AI in what we call the global south, so I hate that term, and fostering a global AI data framework and establishing a UN AI office, which has been set up as part, it was announced on December 31st, set up as part of the UN Office for Digital and Emerging Technology. So that's happened. Now, the whirlwind, all right? In September, it all seemed, right, we had a way through this. Then, just before Christmas, in December, the EU announced their funding for what they call a CERN for AI. This has been talked about for a long while. We talk about it in the UN report, where seven countries, 7 labs are set up with a lot of funding for supercompute to enable innovation in AI in Europe. Then in January, we had, it was a bit delayed, but actually timing worked because it was really, this is the AI Opportunities Action Plan, which is a good plan. I think it's well thought through. I'm not saying that because the minister's sitting here. I've said it to her already. And the 4 highlights were create new AI growth zones. Well, that's a bit like the EU were doing, but and I haven't put the money, but a lot of money behind this. Sovereign compute capacity, which I think we hugely need. The establishment of an AI Energy Council, which is a really good idea, and we go backwards and forwards on how much energy AI is using or could create. And to strengthen sovereign AI capabilities, which has skills and global talent, and yeah. So, in the last few days, Trump revokes the Biden executive order on addressing AI risks. The tech giants are putting $500 billion in Stargate to build up AI in the US. And then just this weekend, we had the DeepSeek chaos that's coming. And I'm sure we'll talk about the role of open source in this and China. Breaking news, Joshua Bengio's latest report on Safety of Advanced AI. 330 pages of it was due out today, but I haven't seen it. And it could be because of all the news that's been coming out. I have seen the report, but I haven't seen it come out. And then next week we will go to France to have another summit. My worry, and I'm just about finished, my worry in all this is not so much as well as the regulation of AI, we are turning the internet into a toxic swamp. We have to think about this stuff responsibly. Could talk more about that if you want. There's a slide I used to use when I was talking about the internet. The future is either a complete disaster, or can we actually make it work for us? It's up to us. But keep calm, and trust me, I'm an engineer. You can turn it off.
Thank you very much, Wendy. That was a fantastic start from someone who has been very close to this, not just nationally, but internationally. I should also welcome our online participants and say, do participate and put your questions via Slido. And thus on Slido, if you go to the Slido website, the meeting number is hashtag 343928. 343928 for questions, as well, of course, questions people physically here with us. Right, we're now going straight to Doug Kerr. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Doug. He is, of course, an expert on this, chair of the Alan Turing Institute, and has had a busy week because he's now become interim chair of the Competition and Markets Authority as well. And you're moving fast, Doug, and we very much look forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, David. Brilliant to see everybody here tonight. Wendy, absolutely amazing. What a tour de force. I'm not even remotely going to try and do this. I'm going to bring you right down from that incredible scenario of global regulation straight to the coalface, if I may. So this is all about how does it actually work at the coalface, as we like to say, what's happening in AI. So let me just touch a little bit on, well, what is it? A question we don't often go into. How does it create value? What goes wrong? And hence, maybe as we see the discussion, how might we think about the appropriate way to regulate something like AI? So what is it? I'd like you to take the following lens. If you think of any organisation, whether that's a university, a commercial company, a charity or whatever, the Royal Society, there's a lens you can put on which is an organisation as a decision-making machine. And lots of organisations take very large number of decisions. And fundamentally, AI is no more complicated than a decision-making machine that takes a bunch of inputs that we typically translate into some kind of numerical form, so we can turn it into bits and bytes and what have you. It applies some form of algorithm and translate it into a series of outputs, which again, we tend to put mathematically and translate it. So that's all it really does. It takes inputs and it produces outputs. And obviously you need a lot of models, you need this, but that's fundamentally what it does. And by the way, and this is my slight beef, if we'd called it applied statistics, we'd never have got the funding, but it might have been a bit more honest about what it actually is. So there you go. So a question that I ask a lot of business leaders, which is, okay, you've heard the hype. How does AI actually create value? What is it that AI does that can actually add any value at all to your organization, whether that's societal or economic or commercial value? And if you take that lens of AI as a part, the lens of an organization as a decision-making machine, you know, you can get humans to take your decisions, you can throw dice to take your decisions, you can ask machines to take decisions. And when you say, okay, AI creates value through making decisions, quite often in conversations I have, there's a bit of a type error. Because if you think about a decision-making machine or organization, you've got two dimensions. Apologies to all the mathematicians in the room. You've got fidelity, bluntly, do you make good decisions or bad decisions? And you've got velocity, do you make fast decisions or slow decisions? And the kind of implicit assumption when you look at a lot of debates about should we automate this, should we replace humans with AI, should we deploy, the implicit assumption is that AI creates value by making better decisions. You know, we could make amazing decisions. We now have an AI that's capable of looking at a photograph of a skin and doing a better job than the world's best panel of oncologists about whether you might have skin cancer. Awesome. You know, it may not. It's almost completely irrelevant. If you actually go and look at AI deployment in the real world, the value-creating lever is not that it improves the quality of decisions. It may not. It's that it massively improves the velocity of decision-making. And massively improves doesn't mean 3 times or 5 times faster. It means 1 billion times faster or 10 billion times faster. And this is not a given, but it turns out in lots of domains, if you massively increase the velocity of decision-making, you can hugely increase the granularity. And in many domains, that turns out to be extraordinarily value-creating. I'll give you 3 simple examples. We know that if you take a retinal eye scan, we actually know we have pretty good models. We know that retinal eye scans are actually very good indicators of lots of major health diseases. Diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular can be spotted by looking at a retinal eye scan. And we know we have human experts who are actually very good at looking at these in detail and saying, yep, here's something, make a referral. So that's brilliant. Problem is we don't have very many human experts. Do you know how many retinal eye scans we did in the UK last year? We did 900,000 retinal eye scans. And we have a few dozen human experts, so we might have looked at 100. Now, if we've got an AI algorithm which doesn't have to be, is pretty good, and remember this is only ever probabilistic, it's predictive, but imagine if you ran every single, because you know every time somebody goes into a high street optician and gets that thin, does an image, run it through a good enough algorithm, and you'll suddenly narrow down to, let's say, the top 0.1% or the top 1% that might be candidates for that. Bingo, you have created tremendous value. Tremendous value. Simple deployment. It's about velocity. Give another example. We've been doing a bit of work at the Alan Turing Institute with the Met Office on a really simple question, which is let's figure out how to improve weather forecasting. Simple. Actually, it's a deeply hard problem. Is that right, Wendy? And it's a deeply hard problem. Let me throw my man back to my good old-fashioned mathematician days, because this is a chaotic dynamic system, which means that tiny changes in the initial boundary conditions can have an exponential growth and things. So it is almost impossible to do a deterministic model that has good accuracy in the long term. Never mind what happens when real weather systems hit a pothole or a bump in the road or a school. It's really hard. So you spend insane amount of money building supercomputers with basically fluid dynamic physics models that are pretty good at saying there's a large cloud wobbling this way. Bloody useless at saying, is my village going to flood tomorrow? And that's what we care about. So what's been interesting at the Turing is we said, well, maybe if you took a physics-constrained machine learning model, i.e. machine learning very good at predicting from history what might happen, never perfect, but you know that absorbs some of that micro complexity and also enables you to get much more granular because we've got 150 years of historic weather information. When did it actually flood? What was the relative level, relative to the wind speed, the wind direction, the precipitation, etc. And you can do just pure, Google DeepMind have got a pretty good one, pure machine learning models. But actually what's interesting, what if you took a physics-constrained machine learning model blended? Nature paper just coming out on this. And actually it turns out these are pretty good. And in fact, they're particularly good in sparse data areas. So we now have predictive capacity for places like sub-Saharan Africa where there aren't many sensors that are way better than traditional models. But that's not really the point. The real point is the first test we said, can we match the predictive accuracy of an existing weather supercomputer? Which only took about 3 months, but it's 6 orders of magnitude cheaper and faster, 1 million times cheaper and faster. And that suddenly means everybody can have a supercomputer weather forecaster, which at minimum means you could do this. And what's quite exciting is that in a world first, the Met Office is currently building physics-constrained AI into production weather forecasting. So watch this space. Those little things you see are actually going to be powered by AI, which is awesome. Physics-constrained AI. So that's great. I'll give you one final example. My day job is looking after the Natural History Museum. And an interesting question we came to at the Natural History Museum is how do you date a dinosaur fossil? It's a really important question to paleontologists and others who care about deep time. And it's quite a hard thing to do because it's a lump of stone in another lump of stone. And they all look about the same, and you've got a 200 million year time span to try and date it. It's quite a hard problem. Turns out you can do it if you take a tiny scrape of the substrate, so it might be in a chalk substrate or a sandstone. You tend to find what we call nanofossils, which is the pollens, the planktons, and things like this. And these are actually very good indicators over time because they evolve, they change. You can get pretty good accuracy if you can really do this. Problem is to do that, you have to scrape a little bit off, put it on a microscope slide, look at it. You take a trained postdoc, let's call him Tom, because that's his name. You take a trained postdoc, and to get a good dating, you need about 2,000 observations. So that is 10 days of Tom, trained postdoc, 8 hours a day, staring down a microscope saying, that's triangular, that's square, that's this, that, the other. It's a pretty boring job. Does that be fair? And by the way, this is a commercial surface that all of the construction companies and drilling companies use when they want to hit a rock and say, how old is it, what's it made from? So we said, you know what, we spun up an AI team at the Natural History Museum a few years ago, and we said, well, okay, Tom, let's put you together with one of our machine learning guys and see if we can do any better. And so they built a model, very simple, take the image, tessellate it into small things, so you only have 1 or 2 things, do some sort of standard computer vision stuff. Again, took them only about sort of 4 or 5 weeks. They've now got a model, which is 98.5% accurate. It's pretty good. 30,000 times faster. Which, by the way, means we're now about to sell this as a commercial service because we can undercut everybody else's pricing who's using Tom Mark II to stare down the microscopes. So a simple thing, how does AI create value? Speed, velocity. Now, what goes wrong? I loved Wendy's, what was it you said? The existential threat is rubbish. I mean, yeah, it is. It's complete rubbish. And by the way, damaging rubbish, I would argue, because it is hugely distracted from some genuine things we should be worrying about. There are really legitimate societal concerns. I'll give you a couple of examples. Imagine an organization that has started to delegate decision-making to machines. And there are a lot of them right now. Every day, as we sit here today, billions of decisions have been made by machines. Credit reference checks, inventory placement, pricing, all of these things are being automated. And there's a class of activity that back in my Amazon day we used to call, how do you manage the machines? We've had 100+ years of the art and science of managing people. We're very early in the stages of managing machines, and machines go wrong. Bad data feeds, stale algorithms, this sort of stuff. And when they go wrong, they can go wrong catastrophically quickly. And how many people are we training today to actually really understand? As we used to say, I used to say this to the Amazon guys, congratulations, you've joined, fast forward 3 years, you're leading a team. Half your team is people, half your team is the machines. And that was the lived reality 6 or 7 years ago. And our job was to teach you how to manage machines. It's a hard problem. And yet I look at people deploying these systems throughout the place with no ability to audit and inspect their performance. That's very dangerous. Secondly, and this is very topical, I know the Minister is all over this, but who gets the value? I think this is particularly pertinent to us in the UK. As you heard from Wendy, supercomputer, arms race, whatever. Fundamentally, compute, even the algorithms, talent, these will probably be pretty commoditized. The scarce resource is truly properly structured, annotated data sets. The UK, partly through some very far-sighted investment decisions, has some of the world's most important data sets, and we give them away for free. And if you look at, that's okay, nothing wrong with it, open government, research use, 100%, public benefit, 100%, but does it really make sense that the UK taxpayer funded the creation of a lot of these data sets? If you look at the data from 2023, top 15 countries, private investment in AI, UK was 4%. It's punching above our weight, but put it another way, 24 out of 25 business users getting the value from UK data are not in the UK. And I think that's something we need to think about. A couple of very quick ones. An obvious one, trust is a massive issue. In these spaces, how and where do you put human in the loop? And even if the machine is better, and I contend in many domains it'll get deployed even if it's not better, because it's the velocity which is what will drive the deployment, there are many situations where you need to have human in the loop, and we haven't really thought through which, is it mandatory, isn't it? And then finally, let me just throw out one thing that keeps me awake at night. For my sins, I ran Amazon's operation in China for 3 years, and I have an amazing, I loved your focus on China, Wendy. I have a long list of things I used to call only in China. But one of the things we discovered very painfully and very expensively is that all of this cool technology and amazing capability is just as available to bad actors as good. And we get a little bit focused on state actors, but trust me, serious organized crime pays very good money and has very good machine learning teams. And they deploy it in very scary and interesting ways that I think we're just quite blindsided to. You see a little bit in the, what happens when obvious things like spear phishing attacks suddenly get really, really good. But there's so many different domains where, and I can't tell you all the confidential details, but when we really drilled back to why we're seeing this level of fraud, why we're seeing the legal, when we did the really deep stuff and you started to trace it, you found at the end of it serious organised crime operating extrajudicially in locations that are very hard to pursue and where it's very hard to see it. And I think the bad actor use of smart technology, I think, is underestimated as a risk. So what does all that mean? One final thought. I think the regulation of this space is really important and really quite challenging. And I deeply feel for the amazing work. Well, first of all, I hugely applaud the amazing work Wendy and everybody is doing on this. I think it's fantastic. I love the human-centred. I think it's challenging because it's got to be thoughtful, as Wendy said, as I'm sure the Minister will respond to. You've got to think about a global, and by the way, global has to include China. It has to include some of the cool stuff that's going on. But if there is a governing thought here, you know, if I could put one thought out here, if you think about how do we regulate many, many, many new technologies coming in, typically they've generated enormous societal and economic value when the dust settles, but they have brought with them legitimate societal concerns, and as has been true since the invention of the automobile or everything else. You know, there are legitimate societal concerns. I've touched on some of them. And I think the challenge from a regulatory point of view is, and by the way, there's a massive opportunity for regulatory arbitrage here because the country or the area that gets it right is far more likely to attract the investment and generate the growth. I think the challenge is, which I thought was well laid out, by the way, in that paper you said that slightly can get the audience, is how do you meet the legitimate societal concerns and be really granular about what those are whilst giving the absolute maximum scope for innovation? It's a hard balance to strike, but if we can strike that balance, and I think if we can strike it in the UK, I think it's a brilliant opportunity. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry if I overlapped.
Thank you very much, Doug, for some really important insights about the velocity achievements of AI and also our national opportunity. We're now going to hear from Adrian Joseph, who is one of our leading applied data and AI-focused technologists, recently the Chief Data and AI Officer at BT, and also was involved in advising on the National AI Strategy. Thank you very much for joining us, Adrian. Over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me here. It really is a privilege to speak to such an esteemed audience of leaders and policymakers at a time when AI is reshaping the world at an unprecedented pace. I have to confess, I've had a complicated relationship with the governance of AI and data. At times, I was allergic to it. Many people in governance roles seem disconnected from the technology itself, its practical applications, and the real-world risks. Risks were often presented to me in a catastrophic manner without an assessment of the probability or the materiality of risks, or they were purely theoretical. Instead of enabling innovation, governance was seen to slow things down with layers of bureaucracy, complexity, and red tape. My position changed when I experienced firsthand what happens when AI governance is neglected. I led a major cloud AI and data migration program for a FTSE 50 company that was delivering 500 million of value over the medium-term plan. 500 million. We were ahead of target, moving at pace, and then we weren't. In the midst of this transformation, we detected and self-reported a significant cybersecurity risk that could have exposed the personal information of 20 million customers. But we caught it in time. But imagine the moment when I had to stand in front of the board and explain that we needed to pause one of the major strategic programs for this FTSE 50 company. You can picture how well that went down. Despite having top-tier internal teams, highly paid consultants, and a leading cloud provider on our side, the review uncovered 4 critical security risks and numerous medium to low ones. The result, a 6-month delay in one of the major programs that was one of the top 3 programs for the business. So this experience taught me something invaluable that I see on the many boards that I work with at the moment. I think boards have two fears. They're terrified of an AI catastrophe, but yet equally afraid of missing out, of being left at the back of the pack. They're caught between letting the genie out of the bottle and locking it away forever. Their job, and my job, and indeed I think all of our jobs as policy leaders and policymakers and leaders, is to strike the right balance between strategy, risk, and resource allocation, which is what I think boards should really focus on, and policymakers. So how do we approach AI governance in a way that enables innovation rather than stifling it? How do we ensure AI is an accelerator, not a brake? So there are a number of things I think we need to think about in terms of boards and policy making. There are 5 things that I think good AI governance will deliver. One is helping to shape strategic direction. When it works well, AI governance aligns with corporate values, regulatory requirements, and long-term strategic goals. It helps organizations build ethical, compliant, and sustainable AI. Second is empowering responsible AI. It's not just about policies, it's about people. Through training and education and upskilling, AI governance ensures that employees understand how to use AI safely and responsibly, fostering a culture of trust and ethical AI deployment. Third is measuring value and ROI. In my view, AI governance done well provides clear frameworks for tracking AI investments, measuring ROI, and ensuring that AI initiatives deliver real business and societal value. In many of the organizations that I work with, we look at four levers of value. Is it going to drive more revenue? So, for example, can I build a propensity model that's going to find the best customers or prospects for my B2B teams? Is it going to make me more efficient? Can I reduce cost? Can I, for example, optimize my field force teams? And yes, we've seen examples of that where we take 20% of the cost out. And by the way, also take 39,000 tons of CO2 emissions out per year at the same time. So being able to measure not just the business value, but the societal value is really, really important. Third value lever is around customer experience, citizen experience, patient experience. Can I use, for example, I've seen examples where we built intelligent pairing models where we connect the right customer to the right call center agent. Why? Because we know that they get a better experience. And by the way, we also get better upsell and cross-sell capability. Fourth area of value is around risk mitigation and management. So all the things you'd expect around fraud detection, cybersecurity threats, but also things like looking at a 300-page document for an organization that might operate in 180 different jurisdictions and being able to pull out the contract obligations in a matter of seconds. The fourth area where I think it's really important in terms of governance going right is around driving adoption. By offering a holistic view of AI activities across the organization, governance presents duplication, identifies opportunities, and accelerates adoption. It should be a coordinated effort and not a fragmented experiment, in my view. And I see too many examples of fragmented rogue experiments. The final one is around enabling smarter decisions. Good governance frameworks help organizations to make informed buy versus build decisions, assess vendors, mitigate risks, and ensure that AI procurement aligns with evolving legal and ethical standards. And it was really good to see the focus on the AI opportunities plan in this area around procurement, for example. One of the things we did at BT was we formed a cross-functional team to create a responsible AI framework. The teams that were involved were the policy teams, the regulatory teams, the data protection office, of course my team leading data and AI, the research teams, all involved in figuring out a framework for responsibly but radically driving business value. And it was based on 4 principles that align to the 2023 framework that the government issued in terms of all regulators should adhere to. The first one, it had to be fair, had to be for good, had to be accountable, and had to be transparent. Those were the 4 key principles. And all AI models, all existing AI models, all new AI models, all had to be evaluated along those 4 principles. So I'm a bit of a speed geek, let me put it this way. I see AI as a Formula One car, a McLaren, delivering mind-blowing performance, the most technically accomplished technology that we have at the moment, only when handled by a skilled driver, like Lando Norris. I was really disappointed that he didn't get the Grand Prix last year, but he came really close. He needs to be supported by an expert pit crew, but also people back at the factory. It needs powerful brakes, robust safety measures, and well-defined rules of the track. And crucially, it needs an engaged audience. Public input to shape the future is really, really important. So for me, AI governance is not a bureaucratic set of roadblocks. It's a finely tuned safety and performance system that allows us to go faster with confidence and with fewer crashes. So let's not be paralyzed by fear, nor reckless in our ambition. Instead, let's drive AI forward, safely, strategically, and at speed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And there has been a very interesting kind of common theme about not being kind of taken over by the wildest sort of catastrophizing about AI, but being sensible about risks. And we're very fortunate. We've got with us Feryal, who is the Minister responsible for AI governance in DCIT, MP for Enfield North since 2019. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be very interested in your comments and observations on the presentations you've heard this evening. So it's over to you.
Right. Thank you, David. And it's a real honour, to be honest, to be invited tonight and to join you guys tonight. So I joined the department in July, and I was delighted to be asked to join the department. And having done over 2 decades ago some machine learning, I thought, oh, this would be interesting, and I'll understand everything that's happening in the department. And it was a rude awakening. Things have changed a lot. But it's been a very interesting time. And one thing I wish I had done is met this panel right at the beginning of my tenure in the office, because we the first couple of weeks and I would say a couple of months did spend a lot of time people talking about safety. Everything was themed around safety and the threats of it. And I was a little, and I didn't, and it was a little irritating, because I was looking for someone to just, because having done some science, and I just felt like there was something, what was the other side? And I started going to talk, and I started talking to people outside my department. And at that point, we were still trying to put the meetings with Wendy and with Doug in the diary, and hadn't quite done it. It took a while. So it was. So I went on an international visit, and it was at that visit that I heard the most levelling presentation, and it was from an academic who very much brought. I felt like all the politicians in the room to earth. That it wasn't, it was scientists. We build this machine. We know what the data, how we're training. It is not. So the idea, there was far too much talk, I would say, on debates and front pages of our newspapers, well, like, Terminator coming after you type conversations. So it was really nice to hear that actually. But yes, there are safety. We need to be mindful about safety. But it was, it was realistic conversations. And so that was really, really helpful. And then I met everyone else. That was, it's been really good. What I heard from Wendy was that my government was the first one to start talking about AI in terms of jobs and growth. So but it is. I mean, I know a lot of work. It was a lot of work had been done. To be honest with you, whether it was on safety, whether on how government should approach the issue around safety within the services. But I think we'd spent a little too long on safety and not enough on the opportunity. And I think that's what my government and our department has harnessed. And we thought we were doing things really quickly until we start seeing things changing. So we thought, as you know, in government time, I think 4 or 5 months to come up with a proposal like the AI Opportunities Action Plan and the deep dive we did into our digital services and coming out with a blueprint of how we're going to transform our government digital services. So I thought that was quite fast until I realised actually everything's moving pretty fast. So whilst government is slowly picking up, it's not as it's not as fast as we like. I think we are so, and I think we are in terms of like governance and regulation. I think we are in a good place. I would say for several reasons, because we have incredibly well-established regulators in this country who know their area really, really well. And I think that's really important. And some of the work that, as I said, that was done by the previous government who set up, for example, I talk about it all the time, it's not really big, but I quite like it. It's the algorithmic transparency standards, which forces every single government service who's thinking about who uses AI to make those algorithms public, so the public have understand where it's being used. And everyone mentioned the issue around trust and understanding, and I think that really, really matters. But there is, for me, so there's lots happening, but one of the things that Wendy mentioned around the global governance of AI and the global regulation, and I think I am incredibly excited about the opportunity AI poses for us to improve our public services, transforming whether that's NHS, that's the education system. And I was at an event earlier where I was talking about, so I was a councillor in Hackney in an area called Hoxton and Shoreditch, where it was supposed to be, the home of like the next Silicon Valley, Silicon Roundabout, and we're right next to, the financial sector of UK, and you had kids growing up in my estate right across the road from where Amazon built his offices, and we had this amazing, and the financial industry, and those kids never, could never think about, never feel that they actually would ever benefit or ever had the opportunity to go to jobs that were created there. So I think for AI has the opportunity to narrow some of the gaps, whether it's access to services or access to opportunities. The idea that, whether it's, the retinal scanners, that could be used in London as well as anywhere in Scotland, anywhere in the UK. So I think the potential to reduce to ensure that our services open and accessible to everyone. I think for me, that's really, really exciting. And also the productivity, it's absolutely, there are huge opportunities. And then we need to look at how that is done globally as well. So we're looking at how we ensure that some of those opportunities that are opened by AI, how we work with our partners globally to ensure that whether it's training, whether it's data, whether it's skills, how we ensure that whether it's Global South or other nations benefit from this. I've made lots of notes and I can't read all my notes. But the one thing, so I don't want to go on too. Really helpful to set out how and why it's so important. So the fact that it makes decisions cheaper and faster, absolutely, at a time when all our public services are crumbling, really incredibly important for us. And I really liked Adrian, your point around the public input and how they get to shape these policies as well. I'm going to go back to regulation. What we're doing. I think saved about as the current activity. It will say we have good, as I said, regulators in place. Going forward, we have made a commitment to bring forward focused piece of legislation that would be focused on the most powerful models of the future. And we're looking to bring about that legislation in this Parliament. But the problem with government, but just listening to everyone this evening, the problem with government's legislating is by the time the legislation's gone through, it's too late. Just look at the Online Safety Act, and it's a really good piece of legislation when you look at across Europe, but it's already out of date. We haven't even started delivering, implementing it. We're already having to update it. So regulation, absolutely, but we need to be mindful of the changes that are happening and make sure that regulation meets the challenges of the day. So yes, we're looking to bring about regulation to ensure the safety of the bigger models of the future, but how we make sure that is updated and it's time that is going to be a big challenge. Sorry, I'm gonna stop there and I'll give you opportunity for questions. But fascinating, thank you so much. We should do this for the whole of Parliament.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I can just set the ball rolling by asking two questions about the government's approach. I mean, first of all, I think it is fair to say that under the previous government, there was a lively debate, and Wendy was involved in it, in 2023 about what the priority was. And it boiled down to two options, focusing on safety or focusing on NHS data. And a decision was taken, safety is the big issue. We'll make that the key part of our AI campaign. And I think now the mood is that the NHS and ensuring that this incredibly precious resource is used in the UK, but then more widely, but we secure the value of it, and it's used above all to improve healthcare. There's now a kind of corrective process underway. We know Peter Kyle and Wes Streeting are both very interested in this. What can we now, after all the activity the last few months, what can we expect to see happening? What is, because let's face it, all these exercises in the NHS can run into the sand. What can we look for? What are the metrics of success? And the second question, because I think we all understand, not least because there's a parliamentary process underway at the moment in the House of Lords going through your current legislation, how slow these are. There is, of course, as well as primary legislation, there is standard setting, there is transparency, we've had transparency on algorithms, there are operational standards. There's a surprising amount that you can do if you're up to speed globally to get a handle on things, even if you've got minimal primary legislation. And I have to say, places like here at the Royal Society, the moment when you've got world-class scientists and technologists involved in the debate who know what's happening, that can be as much an asset in keeping your regime up to date as more primary legislation. So the second question is exactly how you see flexibly, incrementally, your links to the science and tech community, so even without primary legislation, you can keep a handle on things.
That was hard.
I know. Thanks, David. No. I think we've got to I think the important thing that Peter and the PM have been able to convey, and we want to convey, is that safety and opportunity aren't at odds together, at odds with each other. They are the two sides of the same coin. You can't make use of those opportunities and get people to use them and trust it unless you've got safety baked in right from the beginning. So absolutely, and that's what we need to make sure, that wherever we are actually developing AI tools, that that is key with that. And I think so that's which we need to keep banging on about that. You're absolutely right. There are, we don't need this. We're not waiting, and we're not sat on our hands waiting for major regulations to go through. So there's a lot happening. We have, we've had the AI framework, for changing that, called the playbook. The AI playbook that now all departments will have to, as a set of steps that every department will have to go through when they are developing an AI tool to use within public services. And then, as I said, you've got the algorithm transparency standards. There are a whole host of measures, and we're investing in lots of research around societal harms to get a better understanding of the different harms in different sectors and how they. So there is, and there's a lot of work going on with academic institutes around some of those, whether it's looking at where the opportunities are, whether it's around tools to speed up the generation of clean energy, to, as I said, or the societal harms. So there's a lot of work going on that front. And I think the work we do with our academic sector is going to be key in ensuring that we keep a very good understanding of the developing threats, or whether it's the threats or with the safety issues. So, as I said, if we're looking to, safety has to be baked in right from the start, and if we're looking to push and support the sector to develop as fast as we want it to, we need to make sure that some of those issues are dealt with at the beginning. So, huge opportunities.
Great, thank you very much. Now let's collect several interventions from around here, and then we'll invite all of our panellists to contribute. Right, yep. I'm going to get...
Best of luck, Gavin.
No one who works in the department is allowed to ask me a question.
Tim Clement-Jones, David, House of Lords. David, thank you for your points, which I thought were very well made about, in a sense, sovereign data assets and also international standards. But in that context, and of course time will tell whether, and we haven't seen the new AI bill, but I was very taken by what Doug had to say about AI regulatory arbitrage. And if we're going to go for international standards, whether it's 42001 or, risk assessment frameworks that are agreed through the OECD process, whatever it may be, which I think we're striving towards, how are we going then to have AI regulatory arbitrage? I mean, surely the whole idea is we're trying to get those international standards in place rather than have this kind of dog-eat-dog difference between our regulatory systems.
Right, very good point. I think there's a question here. Yes, at the front.
They'll come to you. They'll see you.
Hi, Stacey Hoffman, National Physical Laboratory. And actually, I'm really happy to hear that question about standards, because I was going to ask about it as well. And wonder, are we not taking lessons learned from the internet governance space, where the need to really think about trust frameworks and confidence tools that are the underlying element of all of this, which you can develop through standards, through research entities? I don't see that coming to the forefront of these discussions, apart from the previous comment. How do we bring that to that forefront, and does it need to be pride of place there?
Very good. Now, I think there were some questions over on this side. Yes, those
two gentlemen would like to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nick Connor, 3C Consultant. My question is regarding data privacy. And one thing I've noticed is Meta and Google have sent me updates saying that my data will be used to train models, which is great, and I have to opt out of it if I don't want them to. Now, on one hand, that's great because we're feeding these models, and that will fuel us towards progress and advancing AI. But on the other hand, who owns that data? So my question is, are we going to see suddenly sort of a GDPR side of things where data becomes opt-in to use in those areas? Or are we kind of saying, at the moment, let's have a free-for-all, train these models, and then we'll think about that at another time?
Yep, and over there at the far end, yep.
Yeah, Rafael Hershey from Kiel University. Two aspects I'm interested in. One is the role of open source, and the other one is the energy footprint. But most interested in the role of open source in how it can make the AI more transparent.
Thank you. Well, let's start with Wendy. Each panelist doesn't have to answer all the questions. Pick especially that earlier set, Wendy, about sort of regulation and trust, but over to you. What you respond?
Well, I'm going to say some quick things. I don't want to take up a lot of time. I just want to make the point that, pick up on what Adrian said about responsible AI. The ministers, you're talking about safety all the time, but actually when you talk about responsible AI frameworks, that helps with the safety, right? And I think the trouble with, and it was the last government that started this, so you've got to sort of evolve it. Setting up the Safety Institute wasn't a bad thing to do, but it was too narrowly focused on the existential threat from foundation models. Yeah. And it has to, and I know it's beginning to do this, it has to broaden out, and it has to start being part of the debate around the things that Adrian was talking about, which is responsibility frameworks. And we could drive that debate from the UK to the rest of the world. That's the sort of thing we need to be able to do. I think it's the other thing the previous government did was just didn't want anything to do with academic experts. Anyone with a professor in front of their name was not talked to at all. And I know you're going to change that because you need, as David said, the scientists who know what's coming down the pipe. I'll leave that there, but I was, it was aghast with the way. And then the data piece, I'm a great believer, and I'm looking at Tim here, in the concept of data trust, about how we help people manage data. And I like the idea of a flip to enabling us to put our data into data trusts that are managed by third parties who negotiate with the companies on our behalf. We can do this in a collective way, and I'd really like to see the government lead on this. You could do it with the NHS data, you could do it in your national data library, which I think is a bit of a pipe dream, but it's a nice pipe dream to have. But you're not going to achieve any of that unless you take this concept, the data stewardship and the concept of a data trust really seriously. Yeah. Open source, we have to think that the cat's out of the bag. We've got all the deep seek stuff coming. But the point is, if the closed source stuff is dangerous, well, the open source stuff is dangerous, and now anyone can get hold of it. And how do we keep that under safety wraps?
Thank you. Let's do Adrian, then Doug, and then get to Minister. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think we already have frameworks in place to the earlier point, right? In 2023, we published the guidelines for safe and ethical use of AI that had to apply to every regulatory body that looks after AI regulation in the UK. And I like that we went sector specific, and I like that we provided these principles around transparency, around explainability, around accountability. There were 5 very clear statements that were made, and that, when we were at BT, we looked at those and ensured that we were aligned with those. So I think there's enough for us to, build these frameworks out. On data privacy, I like Wendy's idea. I'm on the board of Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children. I think a lot about healthcare data. 35% of the world's data is apparently in healthcare, and so, I think it's a really rich area for us to be thinking about. What if we had in the NHS app the ability, for example, to, allow permission for 6 months for this particular purpose? So I think there are ways in which we could think much more creatively and innovatively about asking for permission to use data in responsible and trustworthy ways. In the same way that we can donate our organs, relatively easily, why can't we donate, our data in time-bound and restricted ways? And then on open source, yeah, I mean, there's, if I look at the big three players in the world, I think kind of, Microsoft and OpenAI, that alliance, Google, and then Meta with their open source, their open source ones. Companies like Mistral, the French one, again, some really interesting models. And of course, DeepSeek. But I think the important thing about DeepSeek is not, the sort of cost of the model. I think what they did really well was around using reinforcement learning in a way in which we hadn't thought about, sufficiently. So, it's not just brute force of big compute.
That gets very scary, because once these things can reason...
Yes. Yeah. And to Doug's point, bad actors have access to these things. They can see the weights in these models. I can make adjustments to an open source model, that will create all sorts of havoc. So, really, really important to think about, very carefully about regulating, I think, open source models in particular.
Thank you. Doug, if you had any comments, by the way, about the Chinese model, and
yeah,
we'd be interested in that as well.
Yeah, no, terrific. So I won't repeat what's been said, but let me pick up the standards and the regulatory arbitrage point. And China, I think, is interesting. I had the privilege of being invited to attend the Wuzhen Internet Conference in 2014. How should we regulate the Internet? In which the Chinese made a, frankly, not unreasonable point, which is the Internet is entirely regulated by the US. All domain name attribution, all that sort of stuff, and why is that okay? So, and from their point of view, why is that okay? So I just think we should be and I think Wendy's point about the four internets is really powerful, that we get very, very focused on a US/Europe sort of view. There's a totally parallel universe out there, and it's really, really good. I mean, we've seen a couple of simple examples. We should not have been surprised that Chinese AI is better than ours. And
ours, do you mean the West?
The West.
When you think Chinese AI is better than the West?
Oh, by a country mile. So, I mean, genuinely, before I went and lived and worked in China, I mean, you can debate different things, but I simply didn't believe it was possible to basically control the internet. I thought that was too hard to do. Turns out, if you really care enough, you can. So if you've never experienced...
As long as you accept you don't get freedom of speech. I mean,
oh, no, totally, totally. No, totally. But that's a totally different perspective.
They're better than us.
Yeah, no, I accept it. There are many, many things you can criticise. But what's interesting about the party, and the party's, as my Chinese used to friends, it's just another dynasty. It's just obsessed with staying in the power. And historically, it's controlled power through three levers. So the military reports to the party, not the government. The party controls all appointments, and that means every university professor, every headmaster, every politician, every journalist. And it controls what it used to call the narrative of history, which is Wendy's point, everything. So when the internet came along, and by the way, to give you a feel for how important the internet is, she chairs only 4 committees in China: the military committee, the propaganda committee, the appointments committee, and by the way, their HR department is a thing of wonder, and the internet committee. So when the internet came along initially, oh my goodness, unconstrained access, massive threat to control of the narrative of history. And then it turned out, they figured out, well, actually, we could really turn this to our advantage. So the firewall is extraordinary, and it is, and a lot of it was built by Western tech companies, but it's some of the world's most sophisticated machine learning that flags everything, and then 200,000 human moderators. And it's extraordinary. Sometimes the whole story comes through, sometimes without image. If you really care enough, you can do this. And again, if you look at what they've done in payments, or they're looking at these things, it's impressive. So don't be surprised they do stuff. And the data privacy debate has a very different tone there. There isn't any. I mean, in simple terms, if you
Well, actually, that's not quite true.
It's not quite true.
The government, you can't have privacy from the government. They do have privacy laws.
Children.
They have very powerful privacy laws, very powerful restrictions what you can do, but the party chooses to actually give itself the ability to do that. You're quite right. It's a very different world, and if you've never lived there, it's worth trying to understand China. Anyway, but back to the points about and look, as the chair of one of our larger regulators now, I think you've always got to be thoughtful about. I think there is a bit of a minimalist principle that if you're not careful, regulation stifles innovation and gets in the way. So for me, it's right back to you want to achieve. And I think Wendy expressed this beautifully, but actually, I do think we got off on slightly the wrong foot with the Safety Institute, because you set a goal which is stop Gen AI creating killer robots. Great, that's what you did. Had you had a different objective, you'd have got a different outcome. I think the standards is really interesting, because the standards is fundamentally about interoperability and the creation of competition, and that's so important in telecoms and cables and whatever, etc. Don't know how important in different places of AI, but that's where we should be really forensic about saying where does it matter, where it doesn't. And then the brilliant point about how do you trade off good common global interoperability with regulatory arbitrage. It sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but I think there's a ton of devil in the detail. And the danger we face is that if we're not careful, we'll go for too blunt a set of tools, we'll over-regulate. Actually, I could make a pretty strong case that we're in the wrong place on health data. I mean, Cassie knows this as well as anyone. But if you give me a simple example, Biobank, the world's most important data set by good orders of magnitude, the most used, the most subscribed to. 500,000 people fully consented. Yeah. These are people who rock up, come back, full body MRI, total histories, full in questionnaires, fully consented. They're given complete consent to all of their primary data to flow. That data is still not flowing.
Exactly. I
That
totally
data is
support
not
Gurr on that.
Yeah.
We are in the wrong place on health data.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we have to change that,
That is
Minister.
an issue around primary care and GP.
All of this. So I think the point is, sorry if I may finish, is to say, I think within a general framework, standards where they make a difference, absolutely. Common interoperability, absolutely. Minimum standards, absolutely. But I think if we're not careful, we will, nicest possible way, we'll put so many constraints that, VC firms and startups and big internationals say, well, actually, you know what, it's just a bit easier in Berlin than it is in London. And that's the risk we run. So I think we just need to be mindful of that.
Feryal, your observations on those questions?
I think I forgot to mention something that I think it is quite important in the absence of, whilst we're developing the regulation, we talked about frameworks and where they've been developed. Last week when we announced the blueprint, like went along with the digital government transformation plans, we also announced that we'd be putting together a responsible AI development advisory board. But that's to bring together the civil society organisations. Someone mentioned the public in this, and I think the important thing for me is trust. So safety is important, is important because if we're going to have adoption at the scale that we want, we need to make sure that the public understands it and trusts it. And I think government saying it's safe now, it's not going to be enough. So we're going to have to work very closely with our civil society organisations, with academics, with our unions, and so the Responsible AI Development Advisory panel will be doing that. On open source, I don't know, I'm quite conflicted on open source or not, because I think on one hand you've got open source gives you the opportunity to identify the errors, the issues with it, and continues that whole the continued development in that sector. And I think when I was talking to I was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago, and I just remembered the Human Genome Project. Whereby everyone opened up their books around what they were sequencing and the speed by which the human genome was sequenced. And I liken I think that is a great example of when you open up what you're working on open source, I think can speed up development in there. There are it does also means that bad actors have access to it as well. But so it's slight, but we need to keep the on the wraps. And can I just, someone mentioned energy, and we didn't actually cover it. So it is an area, it is one of the recommendations within the AI Options Action Plan. Huge recognition of that, and that's why we've got the AI Energy Council that's been set up with the Department of Business to look at opportunities where we can actually invest in reusable clean energy to fuel what is a very energy-intensive technology. So I know you're tight for time.
Yeah, no, that's good. And in fact, I want to now turn to the questions from our online participants, and you've just answered one, which was about energy usage. But I'm just going to read out the 3 that have been upvoted from our online participants. First, what does a sovereign AI capability consist of? So what do we mean when we're talking about that? Then, when AI is sometimes like a black box, who should be held accountable, and who should be held accountable and how when AI goes wrong? And then thirdly, and by the way, sometimes anonymous, I always say to ministers, anonymous could well be a civil servant from your department. We know at Resolution Foundation, all the best anonymous questions come from Treasury and DWP, we know. Why do some panelists dismiss existential risk when many experts, such as Turing Award winners and lab CEOs, and I think Nobel Prize winners, express concern? They could be wrong, but why are the panelists so sure that they are wrong? There's 3 questions. Let's start at this end and go along. So, Doug, you first.
Yeah, look, I'll tackle that one. And there's been lots and lots of statements about the existential risk. But let me just throw this one out to you, which is a lot of these neural net models and things were built back in the mostly 80s and 90s to sort of mimic the structure of the human brain, neurons firing, etc. And we don't really understand that well how the human brain works, but we do know some of the constraints it operates under, because we know roughly how long it takes a neuron to fire and all of that sort of stuff. And if you figure it out, you look at the speed with which humans make decisions, pattern recognition, all that sort of stuff, you can only go to about 6 layers. And so the one thing we know for sure is that the way in which these Gen AI models work is fundamentally structurally different from the way in which a human brain operates. And then So it's not, I mean, in some ways the Turing test was a massive false herring because it started to think that intelligence was mimicry, and I'm not sure that's right. And I don't see any fundamental evidence that any of these things will ever get to reasoning or mathematics. So I think, I'm not saying it's never going to happen, but the current models, and Wendy will have a much more expert views. I think we are, quite a few fundamental breakthroughs away of anything that even remotely resembles the way in which human operates. So I think there's quite a way to go yet.
Because I agree with everything Doug said. I'm not saying there isn't a potential existential threat down the line. Yeah, and people like Hinton are now saying, 10 to 20% chance that in 30 years, it's sort of like he's narrowed back, he's pulled back from it, saying it's immediate. But so, but the thing is that first of all, it's 50 years since the Turing test was developed, and we're going to have a meeting in this very society in October to examine what the Turing test means today and how. So, and that's going to be really fascinating, because I always thought that Turing overestimated the intelligence of human beings, actually. I have to get that the right way around. It's incredibly easy to fool a lot of people, right? And your point about mimicry is so important there. So it's not that it might, and this is why safety institutes are important, or the whole safety science. We need to be promoting this whole concept of safety science in this area. So please, people don't think there might never be. There could well be, and we need to be prepared for a time when the technology gets more intelligent. I mean, when it starts to reason, then you begin to, but at the moment they're just predictive machines, statistics, as you said.
Let's keep on cracking on, because I want to get one more round of questions in from the floor. But Adrian and Feryal, your comments on the questions from the online participants. I mean, I think we haven't really focused yet on either the accountability question or also exactly what we think we mean by sovereign AI.
Shall I take that?
Okay,
So, I think there is a lot of at the moment, it feels like we spend a lot of time just taking what is being developed elsewhere. And I think you will hear my colleagues say, we want to be, AI makers, not just takers, and developing our own. It's like, why shouldn't we aspire to have own Googles or Microsofts? When we have all of the components that are necessary, what is it that's missing? So that's where
I'll tell you what, you can't get the money. In this country, you just can't get the investment to build those sorts of companies, sorry.
There is, and there was a whole debate recently that one of the committees actually led on, and where we heard from whether it was the venture capitalists, whether it was the British Business Bank and the businesses themselves, and there are a whole host of issues that have been highlighted that we're hoping that the AI Opportunities Action Plan will tackle, whether that's skill, whether that's access to money. But one of the basics is that that came up was around the fact that venture capitalists in this country just don't understand science, they were saying. So we have an actual fellowship. We have a program where we're taking venture capitalists from the industry, and we've got a program where they're being actually trained and to get a better understanding of science. So it is, there are a whole host of issues and barriers, and there's a team that's been developed within our department that will answer to the Prime Minister and Secretary of State, who will try to use all the government levers to remove some of those barriers, whether that's visas, whether that's regulations. So it's looking at those issues. So that's what we talk about when we talk about like sovereign, and it's about being able to build AI, I know, but like British values within what we build will be very important.
One of the tools you have got as well, of course, is procurement, and there is a view that the Palantir getting the contract for the NHS data framework was the missed opportunity when there was a British opportunity to lead on the NHS framework, and it went to Palantir. I think in the sort of history.
That was the previous government.
Yes, I know. I'm aware of that. But
I will look into that.
I think that
no,
was.
But it's really because immediately
that's
the trigger that people say, "I'm not giving my data to Palantir."
Yeah. Adrian.
Yeah, maybe a little bit on the black box one, who should hold accountable. my belief is that we do need to hold tech providers accountable for the technology that they're putting out. In the same way that I sit on the board of DirectLine Group, and I'm responsible for and held accountable, personally liable for making recommendations to shareholders if we divest parts of the business. That is a trivial risk in the context of the risk of AI going wrong. So I do think the tech providers should have more of a responsibility, perhaps personal responsibility for members of the board, and certainly they should be building more inherently, natively into their products that make them explainable. In the same way that you have FinOps and SecOps built into those platforms, you should also have more capability around explainability. And then maybe on the existential risk. It was so narrow that, and I remember, Wendy, you and I and many others were saying to Matt and others that, what about bias and misinformation in a world where 4 billion people are going to
We said it in a parliamentary committee.
We said it in lots of places, that it was really narrowly focused. But, I actually feel that the biggest existential risk for us in the UK is a risk of not adopting AI at the scale that we should be thinking about. And we're going to be left behind. There's a week lost in admin alone in the public sector, that we should be tackling. And the reality is that all of the money's gone to the big tech companies and their chip-making buddies. It's time we got more of a slice of the pie.
Very good. Now we're going to have a very quick round of final interventions here. We've just got a few minutes left. I see. Oh, right. Right. Let's start at the back there. The gentleman in the white pullover. Yeah.
Hi there. So we heard some really good examples of how AI can deliver value, whether it's in the Met Office or the NHS or anything like that. And I work with a lot of companies that are doing the same thing. One thing that they all have in common is that they don't need to use creatives' copyright works without their permission. So I'm wondering why the government is proposing to introduce a text and data mining exception which would weaken copyright protection for our valuable creatives.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Question.
And then I think right at the back, I don't want to miss out someone right towards the back. I can see a hand. Can't see. Yep, go for it.
Thank you. Andrew Mackenzie from the Physiological Society. We talked a lot about DeepSeek in China, and when it comes to thinking about regulation, how can we keep people in the UK, for example, safe if we've got models that are tightly regulated and we know where they come from, but then a model can drop seemingly overnight and lots of people can put data into it without knowing who's looking at it or where it's going. So how do you keep people safe when you can't stop people accessing models that arrive?
Lady down here.
Yes, right. Let's come down to the front on this side, then I move across the other side. The lady in the front row here. Yes, great.
Thank you. Cassie Smith, Health Data Research UK. Just picking up on the point on the risk of not adopting AI and also the challenges of regulating at pace. I think one of the challenges we see in health data is the fear of inadvertently doing the wrong thing. And Doug mentioned, GPs who may have a perfectly lawful basis to share data, but there is a fear there because you hear about these huge fines. Is there a way to drive up standards and give assurance? Because at the moment, a lot of this is just an uninsurable risk. Is there a way that you could have some kind of insurance scheme that was tied to standards that could drive up standards and give assurance to use of data?
Thank you for that very interesting thought. Right, we'll move across and we'll start the front and then move backwards. Yes?
It's a bit following on from the question asked at the back a moment ago. We talk a lot about data in terms of personal data and privacy, but a lot of what made LLMs powerful is professionally created creative data or data from or content from the professional services, and now these organizations are intentionally trying to keep their data out of the reach of these models unless they can monetize it somehow. So is there a place for regulation to encourage or support or create a framework, or is it best left to the market?
Right, yep, and then a few rows back. Yes, lady there.
Hi there, I'm from the Royal Society and I wanted to ask about skills, education and maths and the importance of how we fix our education system so we can really take advantage of the opportunities of AI. The Minister mentioned the local estate where lots of young people have no idea of the opportunities on their doorstep. And we've got a huge crisis in this country in terms of maths and data education. Just under half of our workforce have the maths age of someone from primary school, so that's a big issue in terms of upskilling our existing workforce to be able to make the most of AI. But then we've got a whole cohort of young people in school, and we really do need to equip them with maths and data education.
Yep, right, and then let's keep moving back. Yes, there's two I see there. Yes, the lady there, and then along the row. Okay, right.
Hi, Tamid Kidis Islam. I work at Citibank identifying opportunities across technologies, but I'm also recently been appointed as the UK delegate to one of NATO's science advisory committees. I'd like to ask, because there's an advisory group coming up shortly, how would you go about positioning the UK? And the reason I say that is, it's obviously a big balance between opportunities and risks, but one of the biggest issues is how the UK is perceived. And I'm not saying we are, as you know, Lord Willetts, but the UK is often perceived as far more risk adverse than a lot of our transatlantic counterparts, especially the US.
Right, and another very good question, and then yeah, I'm going to keep on collecting these interventions. Yes?
Hey,
yeah.
I'm Matsia from the School of Law at University of Reading. I just want to follow on the text and data mining exception question. I saw a portrait upstairs of John Locke earlier, and I guess my question is around intellectual property, and I think that trust and protecting IP go hand in hand, and obviously it's acknowledged, especially in the AI regulation bill that's been published, it's acknowledged, but is there a regulatory framework that can support intellectual property at the same time as, allowing AI to do what it needs to do for innovation?
Yep, and then final question right at the back there, yep.
Hello, I'm Ben, I work at an AI startup, and the panel mentioned Palantir in reference to the NHS data, and how can UK public procurement be improved so that we take advantage of these things without creating another NHS spine type debacle?
Yeah. Right, so those are lots of fantastic interventions, and we're not going to be able to answer them, but it's really good for all of us, and if I may say so, I think it's great the Minister is here to hear those points. And I'm going to give the Minister the last word, but let's work across Adrian, Wendy, Doug, and then the last word to the Minister.
I mean, there are too many there for me to pick, but maybe the skills one I don't think we've really spoken about very much. And, you know, it's the thing that I fixated probably on the most when I was, you know, working at BT full-time and in other executive jobs is, you know, how do I recruit, how do I retain, and how do I reskill? Those 3 R's. You know, that was probably the biggest challenge that I had. And it's not just about maths and technical skills. Those are critically important, and we need many, many more of those. And, you know, some of the ideas that the government have put forward in the opportunities plan, you know, certainly resonate well, although perhaps slightly elitist. I think we need to be much broader in terms of the skills. You know, my daughter did a degree in philosophy and literature and she wanted to work in the charity sector. She said, really hard, I can't get any jobs. She said, what should I do? I said, what about being an AI ethicist? She said, what's one of those? I told her. She looked up. 2 weeks later, she came out to me. She said, Dad, they all earn $100,000 and in the US. What else have you got for me? I said, what about being a prompt engineer? She said, what's one of those? Anyway, so I told her what a prompt engineer was. 2 weeks later, she came out. She said, Dad, I got a job. I'm working for a 0-hour contract company based in the US, and I'm helping to train llama models. I'm looking at the prompts that people put into llama, and I'm looking at the answers that it gives, and I'm helping to write much better answers. So I think we need to be much more thoughtful about a much wider set of skills and capabilities that are going to be fundamental to us radically and safely driving AI adoption.
Your daughter is very lucky to get such excellent careers advice. You should make it more widely available.
More people need it, absolutely right.
Right, Wendy.
I have to pick up on skills, having been the AI skills champion. The maths education, I've been on working groups about, I'm a mathematician originally, working groups about maths education since the 1970s. And it's going to take a long, but actually one of the things I'm proudest of that we achieved from the review, and I think this government picking it up, is the MSc conversion courses, where we funded a lot of those, and they're for people who don't have the mathematical skills to teach them about AI and get them into the AI workforce. And I'm really proud of what we achieved with that. And I think you said, Feryal, you're going to, I think that's part of the plan going forward with the skills piece. And I think that's a way forward we can do in the short term, whilst we still try and get more people into maths and to be able to do maths, because we still need the coders and the people who can do the maths. I just want to wait one thing. A point about copyright and data. Having watched Laura Kinsberg swoon at the feet of Paul McCartney on Sunday, and I would have done exactly the same, by the way, I do think the government is misguided in what they're doing with the copyright bill, and I really would urge them to think again. There are other ways to do it, to enable the companies to harvest the data and give people the privacy and rights over their intellectual property. And I'm going to say, data trust is one of the ways to do it. And I think we could lead the world on that. But you have to understand what a data trust is. So I'm not going to do that now, but I really think that is a way to manage this. And for the national health data, it is a way to manage it going forward that we could explore and lead on.
We did debates in the Lords yesterday when the government actually was defeated on this point. The government's argument was that actually they are consulting on it, and it was premature to legislate before the consultation was over. I'm happy to give the government line for you, Feryal. Doug.
Yeah, I'll just build on that one because, you know, back in my marketplace days, we spent a lot of time figuring out how do you connect content creators with end consumers in a way which is fair to the content creators. And historically, you had so many gatekeepers who got in the way and extracted massive economic rents. I think you're in the same world where you need to be thoughtful about this. When I speak to most content creators, whether they're authors or artists or musicians, they're totally fine for people to consume their content if they pay for it, you know? And I think what's missing is the intermediation layer, which might be a national service the UK could build, which says if you're a data owner and a host, we will intermediate between you and the people who want the data, and we'll figure out what the charging model is, and the market will find its way, and therefore it's a data trust. And so Wendy is spot on, and I think it would not, as ever, and it wouldn't be hard to do this. I think there's an interesting question about who you're going to get to build that isn't party-pre, but that's a question for another day.
Well, Feryal, it's so good of you to be with us this evening. Your observations, your final comments.
Just on the skills piece, there's lots going on. So have a look at the AI Opportunity Action Plan. I won't say more about that.
Great.
There's huge amounts going on, like whether it's new scholarships and fellowships, whether it's changing, amendment of the curriculum, and working with the industry to look at the skills needed. So there's huge amounts going on. On the on the copyright issue, right? So one of the first things that was brought to my attention when I first got selected, I had, if anyone knows, Chris Bryant, who's the minister both in DCIT and DCMS, responsible for creatives. He came and plonked himself on my sofa and said, right, this is the biggest problem you're going to have to deal with. How are you going to deal with it? I was like, not heard about it. And he said, right, everyone's been talking about it. Not a single person has written to me when I was an MP, so I wasn't aware of it. But we absolutely recognise that it was an issue. And then there are lots of court cases across the world. We could sit around and wait for the outcomes of those court cases, or we could look at what we could do in this country to resolve the issue. We held very quickly, like within a couple of months of being appointed, we held roundtables both with AI companies and the creative industry to get a better understanding of what were the concerns and what were the kind of like measures they wanted to see. And on the back of that, we have put together a set of measures that we've gone out to consult on. We need to have and that's what's going on at the moment. The data bill was never. Was never meant to deal with the copyright issues. Now, I was so keen to support Chris to sort this out that in September, when I was asked a question, I'm very hasty because recognising how important this was, recognising how little had been done on it. I was keen to come forward with the consultation really quickly, and when I did announce that we were working really fast, I was accused of like rushing it through. So we are taking, it's out for consultation at the moment. We're engaging with the sector, but what we were being told at the beginning about what Europe were doing, we've now come to realise it's difficult to make it work. So whatever comes forward, we also it has to be workable. There has to be a technological solution of how it's going to work. So we are consulting, we are listening, it will come forward, it is really significant. The creative industry is one of the themes in the industrial strategy. It is one of the biggest sectors in the UK. So there is a recognition, we are working on it. So whether it will come forward.
Great, well, thank you so much for that point. Thank you to everyone for participating today. A particular thank you to our panel, who have been excellent. We will now adjourn for a very quick drink and then dinner downstairs. Sadly, our online participants are not going to be able to join us for that, but thank you to our people who have joined online. I hope we managed to get at least some of the most upvoted questions through. Thank you all very much indeed.
Well done, thank you.